It's a pleasure to have this great group together today. We're celebrating a momentous occasion of the Lodish ALS bike ride in memory of Len's cousin, Jules. And I just wanted to go through very briefly a little bit about the participants who will then have a chance to speak and know their story a whole lot better than me. I think we need to just start way from the beginning. And Susan and Len, I believe you met in elementary school. Am I correct?
Correct.
So that was only a few years ago, and they have developed, obviously, the ability to get along with each other, maybe because, in addition to because they share living space with Susan's sister and her family. So it's a co-living situation. So they are extremely adept at making sure that everybody has enough space. And when you're on a bike trip for as long as they have been, not just years, but the time that it takes, you have to get along. And Joan and I can attest how well they get along from the many times that we have seen them, either a few times in progress, but then we all have a celebration dinner afterwards. And Susan and Len regale us with the tales of their trip. Now, things took a change for the better when Susan and Len's grandsons began to ride. And here they are, they're being shown off. One's in a car, that would be Levi. And the other two guys, yes, they are with us as well. And I think you're both gonna get a chance to chat if I don't take up all of the time. We have Ruben, and Ruben, you're here, right? That's Ruben. And Caleb.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, and they participate also by writing and then sharing notes from the road, which generally are about the food they've eaten. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Also, leading the boys, their parents, Chaim and Valerie. And they have added really a lot to the ride. As Joan said, we already have $47,000 going into the ride, which is in a couple of weeks. There's still time for everyone to give. Please get the word out. We'll be sending around a basket at our board meeting soon. And I'm not going into what everybody does when they're not riding, because there's just not enough time. So I'm sure I missed a lot, but I want to introduce Andrew Geronimo, who I've known for a number of years and have enjoyed spending a little bit of time with you at dinners that we've had at international meetings and seeing you at Hershey. And Andrew wrote, and I will quote about his work, "I will be discussing my brain-computer interface research along with the projects we have underway in remote monitoring." And he'll go through that. And I've been at meetings, as I said, where Andrew presented to a very large audience, and they were extremely complimentary and also didn't walk out in the middle. So that tells you a lot about the research that he's presenting. We also have Ann Holman, who heads up her title, let me get this right, Neuromuscular Research Program Manager at Penn State College of Medicine. The research that is being done at Hershey for ALS is robust, and money that's raised at the through the ride is then funneled back to various places in the at Hershey through research. And there's an extremely, sorry, I'm just going to shut this off. there's an extremely active, oh, my cat just joined. I'm sorry if you hear yelling. There's an extremely large active research group at Hershey. I'm sure you've heard the name Zach Simmons. He and Susan Walsh have started the ALS Center at Hershey over 20 some years ago, and it is extremely well known. And Zach and Sue and Ann and the whole group that's involved with research are making tremendous strides in research. I do want to just go back to Susan and Len to thank them for everything you've done, literally blood, sweat, and some tears. And I don't know about anyone else here. I could not do what you do. And I sent you off on your way from Jackson Labs in Maine when you did the all of the not all, but many of the clinics, research institutes along the way. And I know you made a wrong turn when you went when we're getting out off of Mount Desert Island, and that's part of the fun, isn't it, boys? When you get lost and make the wrong turn, is that a lot of fun? Maybe.
Not when you're hungry.
It makes memories.
Right. Okay. I thank you all the Lodishes, the researchers. Joan and Tony have done an extraordinary job organizing all this, and Steve has done his usual great job with patients and patient care. So
I have to break in and just tell a vignette that I think will introduce Andrew, and it has to do with my cousin Jules. When we were doing these rides, we met Scott Mackler, who was using a brain-computer interface developed in Albany, and I forget the guy's name in Albany, but to make a long story short, I wanted my cousin Jules, who was on a ventilator, to be able to use the brain-computer interface. So instead of trying to blink his eyes or do something with his tongue, he could actually do it with his brain. And the quid pro quo was, if we could help the people in Albany get to the next level, he would let Jules use it. So Jules actually used the brain-computer interface. He only was able to use it for a week or so because it was right before he passed away, and he just didn't have the energy to use it. And I actually used it for a half hour myself just to try it, and I was able to use it to communicate. So it brings us full circle, and I'm really excited to hear what Andrew has done since then, because that was a number of years ago.
That's great to hear. Yeah, that's the Woolpaw group at the Wadsworth Center in New York.
Right.
And I have been mentored by them since I've been in this area. And they're great to work with, and they really are leading the charge on that front. I'm glad you described it, because I'm not going to focus on brain-computer interfaces, but now everyone kind of has an idea about it, so I don't have to really talk about it that much. But I'm certainly glad to answer questions about where we are with BCIs as forms of communication devices currently for people with ALS and others. But I'm going to talk primarily about our work that we've done in the last 3-4 years about remote monitoring, which is more important today, and we see some of the benefits of that today than ever, especially since many of the patients who visit our clinic normally are not coming in for regular appointments because they're being seen exclusively through telemedicine or through phone visits. So can everyone see my
There you go.
my screen?
Yes.
And it's nice and big?
Nice and big.
All right, so I'm coming to you from the Department of Neurosurgery at Penn State's College of Medicine. I got together with Zach Simmons, who's the the head clinician at the ALS clinic in 2012, and we were working on a brain-computer interface project then. And I love the work so much, and I love the community so much that I decided to apply there and take a job at Hershey, and we've continued that collaboration. And I'm going to talk about the telehealth collaboration specifically that we've worked on at the Hershey ALS clinic. So this was in 2016 when Dr. Simmons first had the idea that he wanted to at least cater to the population that he saw, to provide at least people who wanted it with some ability to do their health care over the computer. And we did some initial research showing that people liked it. They could communicate well.
Can I just interrupt for a quick second? Levi's going to head back to camp, so he just wanted to say goodbye. Bye.
Does he want to say anything else?
Yeah, feel free.
Do you want to? Here, I don't know if come into the middle.
Can we get back to Levi for a second?
Sure. Sorry. Yeah, let me stop sharing.
Sorry.
No,
Oh, good.
Levi.
Go ahead. You're on. So put your head. I don't know. Just say. Or does anyone have any questions for Levi? And he's gonna head to skate camp.
What do you like best about the ride?
What's the best part of the ride?
Really every day when you just turn into the hotel or motel just at the end of the day.
And
And you
why
know
is
that
that?
you're done.
Why is that?
Just you're done, and you can just lay down on a bed and sometimes if there's a pool in like the hotel, just go swimming and just cool off. And also I have a question. How did Lou Gehrig's disease start?
What, anybody want to try that? I can try it. Well, sometimes people have ALS before they know it. He went from one season to the next to showing dramatic lack of strength. And there was some notice after they knew what he had, and years later when scientists and researchers looked at his hands, they saw the muscle wasting in his hands. And also it was very hard for him to continue to play baseball, but he did until the July 4th, when he gave a stunning address before a packed Yankee Stadium, which I would recommend that you all listen to, because it was it's considered one of the top sports speeches ever given. Today I am the luckiest man on this earth. And he goes on through that. But what you're doing, Levi, with your brothers and your grandparents and parents is so important to the ALS community. And any questions you have, there are books about Lou Gehrig. When my husband was diagnosed with ALS and I needed to know, I literally went to something that's called the Landmark series of biographies of famous people. And I read that just so I could understand what it was. So he basically took himself out of the lineup and ended his career abruptly. He had trouble even picking up the bat by that time.
Have you guys seen the movie about Lou Gehrig's life?
Yep.
No, they have not. Okay. When you come here, we will watch it together.
It's a great idea.
Sounds good.
Have a great day there.
All right.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I'm gonna go back to skate camp now.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for being patient, Andrew.
You're muted, Andrew.
You're
It's
muted,
a very
Andrew.
welcome interruption and a great question. This is what I want. Yeah, so I was talking about our telehealth, our initial experiences with telehealth. One of the major things that we saw that both the providers and the patients that we worked with had an issue with was that it didn't exactly provide equal care. They couldn't make physical contact with the doctor. The therapist couldn't do some of the assessments that they wanted to do. So this got us thinking about how we can really replicate a lot of those in-person assessments that the doctor does when they're on site in the patient's home. So we've tried a number of different things. The first one we did was using remote PFT, which uses, I don't know if you can see me, your cell phone, and it connects to a device, which is shown on the screen there, and it's measuring your breathing function. So this is something we normally do in the clinic to assess how somebody's respiratory health is. And with this device, they can, them and their caregiver can do it in their home. And we showed in our study that you get equivalent results. And this lets us, measure this at the convenience of the patient being in their home via telehealth. And also we can measure it more often. 3 months, which is the typical range that we normally do these measurements in the clinic, can now be measured on a weekly basis. Kind of a better way to keep track of any changes that might be occurring, because breathing health is so important to individuals with this disease.
What does PFT stand for, please?
PFT is a pulmonary function test, and it's
Okay.
in ALS, it's these two tests that I've shown on the screen, the forced vital capacity and the maximal inspiratory pressure. Those are the two things that the therapist will typically measure in clinic. And those are the two things we were measuring remotely.
Cool.
We are continuing this work with a longitudinal study, which means it's taking place over a longer period of time, showing how the measurements that we do in home correlate with the measurements that they do every 3 months when they come into clinic. And obviously with the COVID epidemic that's going on, we don't have those clinic measurements anymore, at least currently. So we are doing exclusively home measurements for these individuals. And really it's one of the primary ways that we keep up with how they're doing since they're not able to come into clinic. The other piece that we have started on is gait monitoring. So we're using all of our devices that we carry around, like our cell phone. They contain what's called accelerometers, which measure movement essentially, and gyroscopes, which measure rotation. And we are sending people home with one of these little devices, which contains one of those sensors, attaches to their shoe, and it measures their movement. Specifically, we're looking at their stride length and duration during walking. And these are both indicators of fall risk, things that we're very interested in monitoring and preventing if we can. So our initial studies with this showed that depending on the type of walking assistance someone's using, you can really tell differences in stride duration and length. And it's our hope that we can send someone who's experiencing some walking difficulty home with one of these devices and be able to track their risk for falls essentially. And maybe use this data that we get as a way to tell them about adaptations they can make or devices that they can use to adapt to changes in walking ability. The last little piece I wanted to talk about was a home assessment of speech and swallowing. When patients are in the clinic here at Hershey, they will see a speech therapist, who's typically a speech language pathologist, who will do a speech and swallowing evaluation to test, how well they're able to communicate, how well they're able to eat food or normal food or food modifications. And we'd like to do that remotely as well. It's very hard to do over typical telehealth where you're just looking at someone over a video screen and listening to them on the audio. So we're working with a company that develops an app that has a number of speaking tests and spontaneous swallowing tests to kind of make an assessment remotely about how those functions are holding up and whether we need to make adaptations in the absence of them being able to come to clinic. So those 3 items I think were important to highlight in terms of the tools that we're thinking about for how to address remote monitoring for people who cannot come to clinic. They're 3 hours away from our clinic and it's very difficult to come in, or if there is a pandemic going on, they can't come in for those reasons. So a number of reasons why home monitoring might be something we see more and more in the future of ALS treatment and management. I'm glad to answer any questions about this and BCI, which I don't have time to talk about in detail today, but that's all I have for you.
Hey, Andrew.
Yes.
One of the things I just wanted to comment on was in all the conversations that we've had over the years about this stuff, it amazes me how this gives us the ability, instead of a snapshot, to have regular data on somebody and the value of that. You know, instead of here's a person in a moment of time, you can take the trajectory and see their progression and therefore help them. You can be so much more helpful when they do come to clinic with that kind of data. It's just amazing.
I agree. I think it gives us so much more knowledge to be able to manage each person on an individual basis. So we're not just treating everyone like we should be getting a breathing test every 3 months. No, we'll make that decision based on what data we have. It's also revolutionizing clinical trials because they're able to get more and better data about the efficacy of different drugs as well. So this type of monitoring technology is going to pop up more and more in clinical trials also.
So will you be measuring as part of some of your experiments here, the quality of life measures that should be improving for people if they're using all of this telemedicine stuff?
That's a great question. We try to include that on all of our research studies, whether it's a standard quality of life assessment or we just ask, we create a questionnaire like, did this device work for you? How easy was it? Did you feel an improvement? We're always asking those types of questions because we don't want to impose these things. We certainly get the feedback from some people that I hated using this application. I don't want to do this, but that just helps us improve the app for people who may want to use it in the future. So we're always seeking feedback from the people who are using these.
Good.
All right, want me to take over?
Yep.
All right, so I'm just going to share my screen here. And everybody can see that. All right, so I know Andrew talked a lot about kind of telehealth and how we're utilizing it. I just wanted to show a little bit of data about how we've actually been using it. So although we started our telehealth program in 2015 or 2016, we actually have been capturing data all along. So what I have here is a little bit of data that's captured from October 2018 through November 2019, so just over a year. And in that time period, we had 61 patients and caregivers that participated in between 1 and I think the most was 7 or 8 visits for one patient. But they participated in 124 visits over that year. You can see in the pie chart over on the right that most of those patients just had one telehealth visit during that time period. But we did have a number of repeats as well. And so in the calendar year of 2019, just under 20% of all of our multidisciplinary ALS clinic visits were conducted via telehealth. So it's something that's becoming a larger part of how we deliver care. Obviously, that's increased significantly in the last few months, but we were well poised to take that on, thankfully. We also see that our telehealth patients tend to live further from the ALS clinic than patients who are coming for in-person visits. And one of our data analysts actually calculated the miles that were saved by using telehealth, and in that time period, so for just over a year, over 9,000 miles were saved. We also conducted another research study. I know this is a lot of information, but it basically comparing those who had telehealth visits to those who only had in-person visits. And what you want to pay attention to here is ALS, FRSR, and FVC are kind of two of the big ones that I want to point out. There's a large difference between groups there. So people who are choosing to have telehealth visits tend to have a lower functional rating scale score. They tend to have a lower forced vital capacity, and they also tend to use NIV at a higher rate. We also saw that men were more likely to use it than women, and that a lot of the technology factors that we thought might have an impact didn't have as much of an impact as we thought. And then again, over on the right, we just broke down kind of how far people are traveling. And we see for people that are traveling at least 2 hours to our clinic, those are the people that are more likely to use telehealth. So we also do a lot of clinical research. Between our group, it's currently myself and 3 full-time research coordinators. We manage probably 40 to 50 studies at any given time. In 2019, we enrolled over 200 participants into 7 different studies, which is tremendous, and we were very excited about that. One of the most exciting studies that is actually just now wrapping up is called the GTAC study, or the Genomic Translation in ALS Care Study. What we do in this one is collect some blood samples for genetic testing, and then we also ask a lot of questions about exposure to environments, occupations, any kind of exposure that they've had to pesticides or a number of other factors. And so our hope is that soon we will be able to see those results. So we enrolled 178 patients over the last few years into this study. And so each of those patients had genetic testing done as part of this study, which was great. In 2019, we also had our first patient advisory group meeting for research. And we also worked with Dr. Alaire Altiero, who is the psychologist that we work with through the chapter. She created a Facebook group that was initially started to manage the community garden plot in Hershey, but it actually kind of took on a life of its own. And when we looked at attendance data for in-person support and resource groups, we found that while other sites and centers were actually seeing a decrease in their in-person attendance, the one in Hershey saw an increase. So now we're looking at ways that we can use social media to increase support for patients and families. We also have a number of ongoing and upcoming clinical research studies or clinical trials. The first is a TAME, it's called the TAME study. It's a phase 2B trial looking at an oral medication called memantine. That one is open to enrollment now. We've actually enrolled, I think, 7 or 8 patients in the last 3 months, which is tremendous. You may have heard about the Healy ALS platform trial, which is going to be a massive undertaking led by the Mass General team. And this is actually looking at 3 to 5 different drugs at this point. We'll start with 3 and then add at least 2 more in. I know Andrew was talking about how remote PFTs are really starting to be used more widely in research studies, and the platform trial is the perfect example of that. Before COVID, there was no intention of using remote PFTs in this trial, but now they are looking at including that at centers where that's feasible. And so a lot of that is based on the data that Andrew and Zach were able to find. There's also the company that makes edaravone is now looking at trying an oral solution. So we have 2 upcoming trials there. The first one will be a similar schedule to the infusion. So it'll be 10 out of 14 days on, followed by 14 days off. And then there's also a daily oral edaravone trial that's being planned. We're also looking at, we're also trying to find funding right now to look at the impact of stimulants like methylphenidate on fatigue and apathy in ALS, because we know that fatigue is consistently one of the most troubling symptoms for our patients. And then there's a lot of other trials coming up potentially from companies like Amylyx, AV Science, and Cytokinetics. So a lot happening, a lot going on. This is our lovely team that I just wanted to show off because they're wonderful. But that's all I had for you.
had no idea there was that much going on in one location.
There's a lot going on for
Very
sure.
impressive.
There's a lot going on. It keeps us busy, which is good. It's a good thing.
Anne, could you address how COVID has affected the research, the trials,
Yeah, absolutely. So it really varies by site. Personally, at our site, we've been very thankful to have been minimally impacted, I would say, in comparison to some other academic medical centers. Right now, we are, for a long time, we were only able to enroll into clinical trials or into trials where there was a treatment option. So any of the observational research, like the remote PFTs, the gait monitoring, those kind of things were kind of put on hold. But we are now able to enroll in those again as long as the patient is on campus already for a clinical reason. So our clinical trials have been continuing unaltered, which has been really nice. Obviously, we've been using, face masks and respirators and face shields and gloves and other PPE as we've needed. But our patients have been surprisingly comfortable with that process, which has been really good.
So if I understand you, patients can come to the clinic to get a drug or a placebo?
Correct. So
that
all
has
of,
not stopped.
correct. That has not stopped.
Is that unusual?
So some sites in the US were not allowed to continue that, or were only allowed to continue ongoing subjects and not new ones. Sorry, my dog's making an appearance.
That's good.
But we've been very fortunate that we are able to continue moving forward kind of without a whole lot of restrictions.
And the same would apply to the labs? They continued?
So a lot of the labs, again, there was kind of a temporary shutdown of all non-essential research. But obviously for our patient population, we don't have the luxury of waiting until a pandemic is over. And so they recognize that treatment trials really can't afford to wait. And so we were able to continue those.
Great.
Len and Susan, do you have any questions you'd like to ask, or?
I haven't been bashful. I've been asking.
I know. I want to make sure if you have anything you want to add, and then we can continue, or unless you have all the information you need.
No, I think this has been very impressive, is I think the best word. All the different things that are going on and how they're impacting the quality of life of the patients now, and also looking for cures to make it so there are no patients eventually.
And
it's an interesting position that I'm in. So as a researcher, my job is to eventually put myself out of a job, and that's best case scenario.
I wondered how the bucket challenge, if any of the money from that has been used by your clinic.
Absolutely. So the GTAC study, the big epidemiological and genetic testing study that I was talking about, was funded largely in part by the ALS Association directly through Ice Bucket Challenge funds. And so it was interesting because I actually came on board right in the middle of Ice Bucket Challenge World 6 years ago, when it first went viral. And we saw a massive influx in the amount of research and in the amount of attention that was being paid to ALS in the drug development world. So I think that there's been an immense benefit to the community, to the research community, because of that.
If I could,
Dr.
Andrew, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, Dr. Simmons and I have had 2 funded projects from the ALS Association, which I'm assuming a large chunk came from Ice Bucket funds. The first one was to get brain-computer interfaces into the homes of patients who needed them, patients with or people who had communication difficulties and needed an alternative form of communication other than their eye gaze, like you mentioned. So that project lasted 2 years, and we worked with 16 individuals and their caregivers to get them set up with a device in their home and train them on using that in their home, with varying levels of success. But that was part of the project to see how that worked. The other project, which we just got funding for, was to continue our remote PFT work. And in addition to monitoring breathing function in their homes, it has a nurse coaching component, which tries to improve on the self-efficacy or the confidence in caregivers to perform these assessments, really as a support tool for the caregivers who are in charge of now doing these assessments in home.
Just
So-
for the kids, for Caleb and Ruben and Levi, the brain-computer interface that Andrew's talking about is, at least the one I was involved with, is something you put on your head, and it's got little suction cups. Looks dorky, but then when you look at a screen and concentrate, it knows what you're concentrating on, so you can pick letters and words out of a list that's on a screen in front of you without doing anything except looking at it.
Again, a better description than I would have given, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to put it into terms that are relatable, and it's actually
dorky.
it's dorky, but it's fun. And if you think about somebody who's basically paralyzed and couldn't talk, now they can talk, and now they can communicate, and that's very important.
It makes a world of difference, yeah.
So I had a question. Steve, did you have a question? I don't want to.
No, go ahead, Ellen.
Okay. Anne, you were talking about environmental aspects of the disease. I'm just curious, did you reach out to the group at the CDC that gets money for ALS research? And I know environmental is one of those. They have collected data about environmental exposures.
Yeah, so I don't know personally. So the GTAC study, the one that I was talking about, is led by Dr. Matt Harms out of Columbia. And we are one of 5 or 6 sites that was participating in the study.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that he has a pretty good network, and so I'm sure that he's had those discussions.
Yeah.
I do know that the amount of information that we're asking is tremendous, and so we are very grateful to all of our participants who sat through a 3-hour process to talk about where they've lived their entire life, what jobs they've had, what they did in their spare time. It's really very comprehensive, and so it'll be very interesting to see kind of what surfaces from the data.
When will you know what surfaces?
So they just closed enrollment June 6th, so it will probably be a few months, but I'm hoping that they will have something to present later this year.
Okay.
I have a related question. Of the 170 something people we enrolled in the study, what fraction of those were you able to tell they had a genetic component, and what do you do about that when you tell them?
Sure. So I don't know the number offhand. I know that it was not surprising. So it's about what we would expect from a population of patients with ALS. When a participant decides to participate in the study, they make the decision whether or not they want the results back or not. Obviously, genetic testing results can have massive implications for a person and for their family members. And so if they don't want that information, we are absolutely supportive of that. If they do want that information back, we actually send it to a different type of lab just to confirm the results. And then Dr. Simmons sits down with the patient and their family and has a conversation about their specific results and kind of what impact that might have.
I wanted to just comment on the ALS Association and the Ice Bucket Challenge. We still have money to spend on research, about 70 or 80 million dollars. And some people might say, and have been saying since 2014, why haven't you spent it all? And the reason to me was obvious. You want to play it smart, and you want to have money available as things like the Healy platform trial comes into being, so that you can invest in that. The association, national I'm talking about, applied for the PPP grant, and were offered over $1 million, probably even more. And that's just for them. Our chapter applied separately. And they ended up declining it because they realized that with $80 million, they do check, people do check how much, maybe not the government, but other people do check what is on your financial sheet. They felt that it would not be good to take more money when we had this money, which is specifically restricted for research. So it can't be, obviously it can't be used for patient care.
Big public relations issue that you had to handle.
Yeah, I'm not on the national board anymore. I sit on, since I'm a board chair, I sit on a committee of just board chairs, and I also sit on research because that's my passion.
Sure. Cool.
Can you hear me? I don't know if I'm on mute.
No, you're not.
Here you go.
You've never been on
This is
mute.
mostly for Caleb and Ruben. When your grandparents started the ride, and when I initially started to work with them, it was specifically for research, for ALS research. And what happened was, what's very unusual about the ALS Association in comparison, there are other organizations out there helping people with ALS to find a cure and treatments. What the ALS Association does is we help people live with ALS as well. So in addition to what Andrew and Ann do, we have clinics like the Hershey clinic that you're going to be visiting, and you guys will actually hopefully meet patients. I just received notification that you will definitely meet patients, and we provide services to them that go beyond research. And Steve can go into that a little, but I wanted you to know that it goes back to what Andrew Geronimo was talking about, is when you make a clinic visit, you test your breathing capacity, and we also offer solutions to help people communicate, and that's what happens in a clinic visit. So there's a difference between the research being done and what we actually do. We have social workers who help people live with ALS. We have nurses. We have an entire host of people out there, medical professionals who help our patients. We have support groups, because when you have ALS and a loved one has ALS, it's very difficult times. So you get a lot of support by going to these groups, which are now being done virtually as well, because you cannot physically go to them. So I hope that helps a little bit in understanding the difference between what Ann and Andrew do. And telehealth has enormous ramifications in that, because now you can provide those services through telehealth. Does that help you understand a little bit? I hope. Okay.
Basically, what the ALS Association is trying to do, and we support with half of the money that we raise, is improve the quality of life of those people with ALS. It's
That's
that
right.
simple.
That's right.
And then the other half is to find a cure so that those people aren't affected anymore.
Yep, exactly.
I appreciate the questions that have been asked and the valuable work of the researchers at Hershey Medical Center, and of course the invaluable work that the Lodish family of multiple generations does to raise money for our cause to make this possible. Steve, I think you wanted to give some closing remarks to explain how this event helps to enhance and continue our mission and how all of this is integrated.
Sure. Thanks, Tony. So just very briefly, you know, I think a lot has been said about that. So we've heard a lot today, and I don't want to repeat what's already been said, but I'll just add to it to kind of wrap it all together, that all this research and what Andrew and Ann described and what a lot of the discussion was around is how the clinic and the direct work in that quality of life that's provided to folks in direct care, as well as the research component, is really the brilliant model that Hershey and some other clinics in the country that reach that bar of excellence achieve. And so what you folks are supporting is really amazing, because what it allows us to do is to take care of those living with ALS, but also to pursue that cutting edge science that will hopefully lead to treatments and a cure. I was thinking about when you mentioned like edaravone being oral. Just the other day, it wasn't even on my agenda for my resource group, and they all got into this conversation about that, and they were all excited because 2 of them get infusions, and they're like, I would love oral, right? Who wants an infusion, right? So those little things, to your point, Len, about quality of life, that's a huge quality of life leap. What if I could take a pill instead of getting an infusion, you know? So those little, quote unquote, little things are big. And then this telehealth thing, as I said earlier, the ability to monitor people over time. Sue Walsh and I have had many conversations about this. She's really excited about it, Andrew, and your whole team are. The ability to take care of people in person and remotely in most cases. It's a combo, right? Is amazing, because it just gives you the data, the connection, the support. And in some cases where unfortunately ALS extends more quickly, advances more quickly, it allows us to be on top of things in ways that we just couldn't do in the past. So in any case, this has been really exciting, and the support that drives and supports and makes this possible is just hugely appreciated. Thank you.
For sure.
Thank you to everybody for all the wonderful work that you do. It's very impressive.